And so it is. Welcome to Express Beyond the Basics. So we're going to start by scaffolding out a simple Express app, the way you've probably done before. And we're going to start adding some stuff. We'll add .env. We'll add router. We'll start splitting stuff out into routes and controllers. And yeah, we'll see what we get. We'll answer some questions too. All right, sound good? Sound like a plan? All right, so I've got nothing up this sleeve, nothing up this sleeve. Don't follow along with me just yet. I'll give you a repo in a sec that you can pull down if you want to follow along for the next part. But I'm going to npm install, I'm going to npm init -y, get myself a package JSON, and then I'm going to install Express. And while I'm at it, I'm going to throw cores in there also.
Kyle, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, I should probably share my screen. Come on, Kyle. All right. So I've got a package JSON, package lock JSON. I've installed Express and cores. So then I'm going to make an index.js file. And I'm going to bring in Express. I'm going to bring in cores. I'm going to make an app out of Express. I'm going to tell that app to listen on whatever my port is, and if it's not set, you just default it to 4000. And then I'm going to set the port to process env port. Actually, yeah, I can just do it that way. I like that better. Cool. Looking pretty good so far. And then let's make a route that just gives us some confidence that this is all working. Request response.json. Neat. So I should be able to, let's see, I'll throw a start script in here. I should be able to run node index.js or npm start. It says I'm listening on a port. If I go over to that port, do I see something? I see something. So this is our basic Express stuff. So this is stuff that we should be pretty comfortable with at this point. So how about I throw that in a repo and ignore node modules by putting that in a getignore file. All right, what am I committing? That looks good to me. Let's see, starter code. Oops, spelled Express wrong. Classy. Okay, we'll call this Express Beyond the Basics. Get remote add origin. Get push origin master. And we are in the Express business. So I'm going to post this link in chat. If you want to clone that and then make sure that you npm install and then npm start should run the server for you. Let me give you a sec to get caught up. All right, cool. So first thing that I want to do is I want to separate out this app from the thing that's running it. Because here's the problem. Right now, let me throw cores in there too. App.use cores. Cool. So right now, this index.js file, it's the main thing that it's doing is this app.listen. If I run that file, that's it. The file also isn't a module. It doesn't export anything. That makes it a little bit trickier to test. If I want to test this app in isolation, I don't really have a good way to do that. So, really common pattern is you have an index.js, and then you have an app.js. And here's the difference between those. So we'll touch app.js. Let's open up both of these. We're going to take everything that isn't running our app, and we're going to put it in app.js like this. And then we're going to module.exports app like that. Then we're going to import that in over here. Cool. Now, all of the app logic and all the stuff we need to serve the app are separated. Ask me some questions about that.
Okay, so the app JS is where you're putting everything that is not running. Say that one more time. Well, how do you differentiate between the two?
So the app.js is the logic of my backend. Index.js is the stuff that I need to run that logic. So that right now I just have the port, and I'm telling the app that it should listen on that port. Those things don't have anything to do with the business logic. And the nice thing about this is I can also import this app.js file in, say, a testing framework and test my route logic and stuff without actually running the app, which way speeds it up. And there's a good tool for that called Supertest. So what you do is you say, all right, I want to make a request to this app that I made, and I make a GET request to this path, and then I want to assert that the content type comes back this way. I want to assert that I got this status code back, and then I want to do this thing with it. And so in practice, that ends up looking like this. And because we've separated out our app logic from the thing that runs it, we can get this app without also running it. Pretty cool. So splitting those two things out, super common.
So I guess if I were to have like a controller for trying to think of like an example, but I don't know, some sort of like endpoint or page, that would then go would that be its own file there, or are we like kind of like bounced between the two here of index and app, more or less, and then just splitting them out into routes?
So all of those routes and stuff are going to eventually come into app.js. Here's what this looks like in a production app. So like if I go to the develop Denver backend, we do the same pattern. And it looks like this. So debugging stuff is also a part of this. The port logic can get a little bit more involved. There's the server.listen. If you can pass in the port as either a number or a string. Some of the error handling that your operating system would throw if you try to like run the app and it won't compile correctly or something, that's all handled here. So like, for example, that error like, oh, you're already using this port, that you can write a custom handler for that. That's a good example of stuff that would go in an index file versus an app file. But really, this is like coordinating all of the other things. So all of my middleware, core is an example of middleware. All of my auth stuff, all of my routes, error handling, all that stuff is brought in here.
For like, I'm trying to also like understand like what, because Rails is so opinionated and like what Rails does and like kind of under the hood versus like what you have to kind of implement in Node versus like to me it's like it feels like there's like so much customization or like I can really kind of tinker with like a little bit lower level stuff, and I just don't know to what extent like Express and Node allow me to do that, or maybe I shouldn't even touch that yet because I don't want to like, you know, go down rabbit holes or mess things up. And so I'm trying to like gauge that spectrum of like, you know, going too far into something or just establishing like basic controllers, routes, and, you know, basic functionality, or sticking to that, I should say.
I would say that in general, you want to not get too complicated with your, like the structure of a Node app. So the next thing that I would do on this is probably start splitting out these controllers from these routes. And like controller is like maybe single quotes on this. It's really a route handler. It's really middleware, but controller is probably the closest analogy. So I could call this something like index controller. And it takes in a request and a response and does that. And then the advantage of doing it this way is now I can use that this like little index middleware function in more than one place. I can test it independently, and I'm also making it clear, like this is essentially a router at this point. It's saying, all right, get requests to this URL should be handled by this. But I could also have something like, I could reuse that also if there's more than one thing that would respond in the same way. And then the next step of that is starting to put those in their own files. And so I would say if you have like a controllers folder and a models folder, and then like a utilities folder, that's pretty good. And then maybe like, as your like routes get more intense, like one of my to-do items is on the Firebase site, we do this also. So those are getting a little bit long, bringing in all those controllers. And so here's all of the valid routes on the Firebase site. That's starting to feel a little bit long to me. So I would probably maybe put that in a separate router file. But one of the advantages of being so unopinionated is that we're like you want your choices and how you're organizing this to be pushed by need. You go, God, this file is getting unwieldy. And so you go, cool, well, how could I solve this problem? Well, I can solve this way, this way, this way. And so rather than just like slapping a pattern on top of something, you're trying to let all of those needs drive your organization decisions. That's why people who like unopinionated stuff like unopinionated stuff. Nothing you don't need.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense in like opinionated versus unopinionated, and like while there are solutions to your problem, like which is the most optimal solution that you're kind of fishing for.
Yeah, and they can change. Like moving around files and folders, that's cheap. Like that's not hard at all. It's not hard to debug, and so you don't need to get it right the first time. As your app evolves, you can change how you're organizing your code easy. So next thing that I would probably do is start figuring out how I can break these into routes. So let me show you how that works. Let's say, all right, so that's index. It's not the greatest example. Let's say we got dogs. So we have a list dogs controller. All middleware at Express looks like this, follows this pattern. It's a function that takes in a request and a response. If you want like another thing to be able to, another piece of middleware to be able to respond to it, you can also put next in there. So we might have a list dogs controller that responds with, here, check this out. We can do this too. Just make an array of dogs. So we could respond with dogs like that. We could have a like get dog controller that maybe it gets a dog from request.params.id and let's see, so that would come in as like one, or actually let's just use find, that'd be better. So I can get some dog and then respond to it. I could have a create dog controller, yeah. And that might be something like dog is name request dot body dot name, and then do something like let next ID equal 3, and then ID is next ID increments, and then dogs becomes that, and I respond back with the dog that I added. I could have a,
and you don't need to put next in as a parameter when you're referring to it for the next ID.
no, so next ID is just this variable I made up here.
I didn't even see that. Okay, thank you.
And I'll do one more. So let's say there's a delete dog, and it is going to, so you need to make that reassignable. Dogs is keep every dog that doesn't have the same ID as request.params.id. Okay, so I have all these different actions that I can take on dogs. I kind of made a fake database, and now I can add routes for these. You can say any get request to /dogs should be handled by list dogs controller. And any request to /dogs/ID should be handled by get dogs controller. And a post request to dogs should go to create dogs controller. And a delete request to dogs/ID should go to delete dog controller. Okay, so I've like enumerated out the behavior, and I've said what routes should call those behaviors. But now this app.js file is getting kind of gnarly. So it would sort of make sense to do something like mcdir controllers, and then touch a like dogs.js file in there. And in this, I always forget the syntax for it. Express router. This is built into Express.
Oh yeah, I think it's like router equals express.router with a capital R.
Yeah, it's something like that. Route handlers. Express.router, here we go. So you bring in Express. And then you make a router with express.router, capital R, because it's a constructor. And then router ends up taking the place of app. All the ways that you used app over here, those just become router. So I can say all of these should be router instead. And then the router is the thing that I'm exporting. Like that. Now, here's what gets fucking cool about this. This is like one of my favorite Express things. All right, so I have all those in the thing. I don't have those there anymore. I can bring in the, bring those in with like require controllers dogs. And then the way that I like use this in the app is I say app.use anything that starts with dogs. I want this dogs router to handle it. Wait for it. And now I can get rid of the word dogs in all of these. Because the path is going to get added to whatever you did here. That's so cool.
No, that is pretty cool.
So then I can take all these controllers, also my fake database, and just add all those here. So like that's how you would start modularizing your code. And like these routers can also have routers if you want also.
And if anybody else has questions, please jump in. I can just keep going. I was hoping you could get into like async functionality and like the difference between like async awaits and just different ways of like requesting data. Basically, my app doing like a personal trainer website for a friend where I'm building out a front end and a back end. and I'm just trying to understand the relationship between database, node, and the front end, and like properly structuring that.
Sure. So let's put something async in here. Let's say these, like getting the dogs, like accessing this, let's say that was asynchronous. So easy way to do that is make a function called getDogs that returns promise.resolve dogs. So this is a promise now. getDogs is a promise. So if I want to actually get the dogs from it, I have to call .then or something like that on it. So if I wanted to do something like that, I can no longer do something like dogs equals dogs. Or if I do something like that, dogs at this point is the promise, not the value that the promise resolves to. So what you would do instead is you .then off of it and then take the dogs that resolve from that promise and send them back. So that's how we would do that with .thens. You can throw a catch on there if there was some issue with that. And I actually do literally this exact thing pretty often. And the reason why is it's really easy to debug static data like this. And I can play around with different designs and like some of that sort of stuff. And if I wrap it in a promise like this, when instead of promise.resolve, this becomes connects dogs, select all from whatever. This code doesn't change at all. This is the same code. That's nice. All right, so I get the dogs and then I respond with them. So that's how we would do that with promise chains. Here's how you would do this with async await. Exact same code, async await style. We'll call that.
And then also after you're done building it, can you just like maybe like dive into it and like explain the differences, maybe what's happening under the hood?
Under the hood, they're identical. It's only the surface part that's different.
Oh, okay.
So if we did that with async await instead, all you have to do is put the word async in front of the function. And that works if it's a declared function, like with the function word, or a fat arrow or whatever. Doesn't matter. Just put the word async in front of it. What that does is it changes this function to an async function. The only thing that's different about that is now you can use the await keyword. Otherwise, you can still return values like normal. It's just a different kind of function. It's a way for JavaScript to let you use this new syntax without breaking all old JavaScript. So like putting the async keyword in front of this is essentially saying like, I want to write a function and I intend on using this new keyword. So the way we would do that is you can totally assign the results of promises to variables if you put await in front of it.
Yeah, my old project, the API I was requesting, like for whatever reason, like you had to use async functionality. You couldn't use anything else, and I was curious. But that maybe that's why. Is it like it's? It sounds like a way of using. You said like different syntax. Is that really just the difference?
It's purely a syntax difference. Without the catch, these two things are the same thing, and under the hood, they're identical. Like. Async await is just sugar for this. Now, and so you may be wondering like, holy shit, Kyle, why didn't you just teach us async await? That's so much like simpler than the promise chains. And it kind of looks that way right up until you also add the error handling. Because we get this awesome .catch feature with the promise chains. The way you have to do that with async await is with try catch. So you try to do something, and then you catch any errors that happen, and then you do whatever you want to do with those. And then if you tried to do this, wouldn't work. Can anybody tell me why that wouldn't work? Why won't this code work the way that we think it will? I'll give you a hint, because it won't be able to find dogs.
Is it possibly where like the response is placed? I'm not sure.
Kinda. But why? Why won't it be able to see dogs there? It's right there.
Is it out of scope?
It's out of scope. Because const and let are block scoped. That's a block. That goes away as soon as that's over. Okay, well now I need to throw this in there to account for that. Even though I'm not actually worried about response.json erroring out. Still has to be in there. The other way I could do that is like my least favorite pattern in all of software. Do something like that and then assign it in there. Gross. I don't particularly like that. So then you end up doing that. Well, okay. All of a sudden, that doesn't look quite as good as this does. It's also less testable. Because I can't isolate out this behavior here. So anybody who tries to sell you on like async await being like on its face superior to promise chains is smoking balloon juice, because here's the other cool thing about .catch. All right, so I do that. Let's say I have a few of these things. So I got this big long promise chain. This catch will catch any error that's thrown in that chain. Here's where this gets cool. You might not have realized this. You can also put them wherever else you want. If you want specific error handlers for like different parts of it, you just drop them in there. And then if anything in these first two errors out, it's going to go to this catch block. If this thing errors out, it goes to this one. If any of these two error out, it goes to this one. That's sexy. And it gets even better if you start wrapping those in functions. So if I have a function that's like show error that takes in an error and logs it, cool. Well, now that .catch can become show error. And then if I want a function that's like respond with, I just call it respond, I guess, that takes in dogs and then just responds with it. But really, like if we extract that out, it's pretty abstract at that point. So we could do that. I guess it wouldn't be called dogs anymore. All right. Respond with dogs. So we could do that. And then this becomes cool. And then that becomes respond with dogs. And really, this whole thing I'm going to sprinkle these in there. So you can build these promise chains out that look so much better than any like try-catch mess ever will.
Cool. Yeah, that clears a lot up. Thanks.
But yeah, they're interchangeable. You can just go back and forth between them. It's easy. And I really do like Async Await in test code. Stuff that like, if I can pretty confidently not handle those errors. If I can confidently not handle errors, like test code, totally fine. If it errors out, like you get a compile error when you try to run it anyway. Stuff like that, I really like the async await syntax. As soon as you have to add error handling into it, though, I think it's not as good as a promise chain.
Hey, Kyle,
cool.
I
What up?
had a question about the router. So I was just curious, what exactly is that doing? Because I built an API, an Express API, without actually using it, even though I separated my routes into different files, but I just use app for everything.
Sure. So the thing that it's doing is that I can mount it on this like subpath. So now anything that starts with dogs gets sent over here. And then I don't need to say dogs in these routes. That's the thing you get over just using like modules.
I was able to do the same thing without it. I'm wondering if there's just something else that I added to be able to do that.
You can send it over to me and I'll take a look, but that's the difference. Cool. What else do you guys want to see?
I guess I would assume using in like a controller or something, but like an app.post or like an app.put. Curious how those like functions, but I would just assume that like it would be just like a CRUD functions in Rails, and just,
that's exactly what it is. The thing that you don't get for free is you have to parse the body. So you got to bring in body parser. It comes with a node, so you don't need to install it separately. You need to say, any request that comes in, I want you to try to parse it as JSON. And that's what allows you to do things like request.body.name. Because the Express doesn't assume that you're trying to send JSON, doesn't assume you're trying to send text. It doesn't even assume that you're trying to send everything in all one go. It like takes in the raw network request for that data, which might come in chunks. And so if you want like the 99% of the time, you're like, nope, just give me the JSON. You need to tell it that that's how you want it to handle the data that you get back. But yeah, once you do that, request.body will have anything that came in the body of a request. Request.params will have anything that comes in like this. So yeah, this will make like request.params.id. That'll be that. And then the other one is request.query, anything that came in on the query string. 3 ways to get data into a controller.
So like, what is something that like you appreciate Rails feature-wise and functionality-wise versus like Node? I know that like it seems like obviously you have a lot more, like we were talking about, like opinionated versus unopinionated, but I'm just trying to like, differentiate the two.
Sure. I've probably made more Node apps than like anything else in my career. And after a year of making Rails apps, like I snapped the other day. I was like, why have I typed this boilerplate bullshit out for the 400 billionth time? Like, especially stuff like this. Why am I writing that? And like, here's the irritating part about it. When I look across all those apps, I always do this slightly differently for no good reason. Like, that's annoying. And I really like that in an opinionated framework, the only stuff that I write is the stuff that's specific to that app, not the stuff you would have to write for any app. And like those little tiny differences, they make your app harder to think about. They make it harder to debug. Slightly different naming conventions. It's a bunch of shit like that that's not adding any actual value to users for sure. It's not improving the developer experience. The stock argument in favor of unopinionated frameworks is like, well, I can just write it exactly the way that I want it to. What do I give a shit? Like, it just needs to work. Like, let me worry about the logic of it. I don't want to fuck around with like how to build an app. And also, like, if somebody figures out a really good, efficient way to do that, I want to be able to just like upgrade Express and I get the benefits of that. So I really like that about opinionated frameworks in general, and Rails in particular is really nice. That said, if I need to knock out a couple endpoints, I can do it a fuck a lot faster in Node. Also, Node saturates a little bit better. So under traffic, I think Node performs a little bit better for like most HTTP stuff. But as it gets bigger, I don't know, you start losing a lot of that advantage.
Yeah, that was something that I think in the talk this morning, and just from, I did like I had an interview with not an interview, but a demo with a company for like their database to use in my app.
Mm-hmm.
And scalability is something that I just don't know really anything about.
It's a different animal. I'll give you a really good example where like I still really prefer like Node Express kind of stuff. So on my personal site, down at the bottom, I have this contact form. So this goes to an AWS Lambda function that connects with Twilio SendGrid, and then it sends me an email. So here is the code for that. There it is. That's the entire app. So if the method coming in is post, then configure like my little SendGrid plugin, parse the email address and the message out of the body, and then use SendGrid to send the email, and then return back these headers to whoever was asking for it. Easy. This would be way, way more code in Rails. It would also be heavy. This doesn't need to be heavy. This is the only thing this entire app does. And so one of the cool things about that being so light is that I can do something like deploy it to an AWS Lambda. So how Lambda works is it's an Amazon Web Services tool. You can think of it as like function as a service. This entire thing is one function from top to bottom. And every time somebody wants to call this function, I pay 1/100 of a penny or something like that. But that's it. Otherwise, just sits there. It's like juiced up. It's ready to go. And as soon as I get a request, I pay 1/100 of a penny, and AWS runs this function, and it sends me the email. That is nice. Versus something like Rails, where like that app would need to be running around the clock. I don't get that many emails. Not that many people want to talk to me. Like I get maybe 1 or 2 emails a month. If I were running a server around the clock to handle that, that would cost me probably about $10 a month. $10 a month to get 1 or 2 emails, like fuck me, man. The Lambda scales down way better.
Yeah, okay, that's making more sense because especially for like smaller scale applications as well, you know, when you're not handling a ton of data. Because it sounds like one of the things that our conversation with around to the database companies that I'm trying to incorporate more is called HarperDB, which can do like massive data, but talking to the architect, at least, it was also designed for small applications as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically like the framework. It was built in Node, but he said obviously any of them can work well with it. But that makes a lot of sense in that like this is obviously a lot smaller. Where Rails like it's opinionated. Like why is it that Rails like it's just everything's included with Rails is why it's heavier? Or I'm trying to understand like why Rails is heavy.
Because it's designed for bigger apps. And so if you're doing a bigger app, that's a perfectly acceptable way to do it. Now consider this though. All right, if I have this function as a service, what if I could find a way to kind of make my entire backend that? What if like the dogs / dogs endpoint, what if instead of that being a Rails app or an Express app was like a little micro app that just handled dogs? And I could also have a different one that was just owners. And if these things are all talking to each other over HTTP, who gives a shit if they're even in the same language? One of them could be Go, one of them could be Python, one of them could be Node. What does it matter? And that pattern is called microservices. You make these little isolated parts of a backend, and then you network them all together. And then like the way that you try to speed that up, because network requests are super slow, so it sort of seems like, all right, well, we just took the slowest part of the internet and amplified it, because anytime these things have to talk to each other, they have to talk in a really slow thing. Well, with AWS, you can say, I want all of these different services that I have to be physically co-located. And so it's making an HTTP request, but it might be making it on the same computer or like the same server rack or something like that. And so then you still have a really fast communication between those things, but they're completely isolated. So you can upgrade them separately. You can refactor them separately. You can't do that with Rails. Like, there's not like, well, part of my Rails app is Ruby, but this other part is something else. It all has to be in the same thing, even if it's not particularly well equipped for it. All right, one last thing I want to show you. Another cool thing you might not have realized you can do with Express. Let's say I wanted to make this controller show all of the files that are in my current folder. Huh. Like, that's like an ls. But how do I do an ls on a computer from JavaScript? Well, you can't do it in the browser. Your browser can't access your file system. It's a security thing. But your backend has no such restrictions on it. So we can do here is pull in a tool called, it's also built in, this one's built into Node, child process .exec. And then we can do something like execute ls like that. And something like that. I'm not sure if I got the syntax exactly right on this. Let's take a look. Wow, wow, wow. Madness, mayhem. There we go. So if I run this, oops, let me get rid of some of this other stuff. All right, so it's listening on port 4000. Hey, look at that. That looks like a whole lot like the files that I have on there. All right. Now you are hopefully thinking, cool. Does that mean I can run anything? And the answer is, yeah, that's exactly what that means. You could just trigger some arbitrary shell script. So that means that, actually, shit, let's try this. If I touch some utility.rb and I want maybe this thing does puts, what up, yo? I'm in Ruby. Then I could Ruby some utility and it prints something to the screen. Okay. That means I can also do that there. And holy shit.
Holy shit.
I can run a program in one language from another language. So let's say there was some subset of my app that I really wanted to use Python for, or Ruby, or C++, or Bash. Why not?
That's super fresh. That's cool, Kyle.
I miss having you in class, baby. Oops, come on. Child process.exec.
Oh, that's super rad. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, so hopefully this gave you an idea of some of like the things that we can do once you're already comfortable with just routes and stuff in Express. That's the next stuff.
Awesome. This is perfect. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Very
Cool.
cool.
Any
Thanks,
last
Kyle.
questions?
No, I sent you my my back end
Okay.
in Slack. You could just
Okay. I'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. I guess like I obviously it's gonna be dependent upon what like application you're running, but do you recommend other I mean what the word, like dependencies that like Express most often you see with Express that people using with Express for like I don't know deployment or for just making Node or Express better?
One more that I'd have you look into is called Helmet. This one is like probably the easiest way to just plug a lot of security issues. And you use it like that. That's it. And it does like all of these things. These are really common security issues with Node apps, and you just get all of them for free.
Awesome. Thank you.
And then I'd also mention .env, so I can show you how that one works real quick. By npm install .env. This is for stuff that I want to be able to use in my app, but I don't want to commit into the repo. So if I make a .env file, this is things like top secret key equals, come on, whatever. So I don't want to put that in my repo. It's listing it right now, so I want to echo .env into my gitignore. And then the way that, so that's not a part of my Git repo anymore. Nice. The way that I use that in my app is by telling, I don't even need to do that, is to require .env in and then call .config. So what that does is it takes the things that were in that .env file and just throws them in my operating system's environment. And that will let me do something like is process.env.topSecretKey.
That's actually, I'm glad you brought that up too, because there was something in my back end that like I didn't know how to not. I just been posting I just made my GitHub private for now.
Yeah, that's not the solution to that. Also, when you fix this, though, keep in mind your Git repo has every single state your repo has ever been in, including ones where you didn't have the thing hidden. So if you need to like scrape out a file, you need to do that recursively. And so like, if you look up like permanently remove file from Git repo, it's a really complicated ass script. It's this one right here. And then this file path right there, that's the thing you have to swap out. But you run this and like get rid of your env file or whatever. So it's not in any of your previous commits also.
Right, yeah.
You're gonna have to git push force because it's gonna, your history has changed, and so it's gonna break anything that depends on that, but that's how you solve that problem.
Okay.
Ran into that many times.
Yes. Yeah, if you do that, then we should be able to see our top secret key. Yep. And what's cool is like you can then confidently give somebody else this repo. The logic hasn't changed at all. And then you just need to Slack them or email them or whatever this file. Cool. That's 80% of what you need to know about Node and Express.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very helpful. Very appreciate it.
Have a good lunch, everybody.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yep,
Talk to you
cheers,
later.
Jared.